It was obvious the security lights would set off an alarm. I needed to find somewhere to hide, or the guards would kill me. According to Mr. Sultan, this was the switch that would open the laser door to Mr. Logan's cell block. Mr. Silton seemed to think this would open the cell block door. Luckily, he was right. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Logan's cell was locked, but, thanks to my speedy brain, I was able to hack it in seconds. Mr. Logan was not pleased to see me. No one ever was. But I couldn't work out why. However, when I mentioned Mr. Silton, he soon cheered up. We quickly made our way outside. Although I wasn't sure about Mr. Logan's stealth techniques, they were quite different from mine. But someone must have noticed Mr. Logan was missing, as, with a bright flash, we were soon attacked. "This still wasn't the plan," said Mr. Silton as he insisted he was okay, and that, no, I didn't need to clean up the trail of blood. He did however urge me to take care of the huge tank bearing down on us. We all piled into the van. Mr. Logan and Mr. Preston took out large guns as Mr. Silton gave me some driving software. It basically explained that one foot pump made the bang go, and the other one signaled Mr. Logan and Preston to fire their guns. I hoped that all the bullets fired led to non-fatal wounds, but statistically that was incredibly unlikely. Strangely, I felt too excited and relieved to care. Mr. Silton winced as he clutched his bleeding shoulder and explained how you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. I think broken eggs meant dead people. Sometimes, he said, you have to do whatever it takes to survive, even if that means killing.
But not innocent people,
said Mr. Logan as he stared straight ahead. Eventually, I asked Mr. Logan what he had done to end up in prison, but he just continued staring out of the window. Mr. Preston smiled as he said, I suppose someone should explain. He told me when the war started, he and Mr. Silton had avoided conscription, but Mr. Logan was called up. His unit's first orders were to sweep through a huge urban area, killing anything that moved. The only trouble was, hundreds of refugees had recently taken shelter there. The generals knew that those people were there, said Mr. Preston, but they couldn't have cared less.
This isn't the time for another one of your conspiracy theories,
interrupted Mr. Silton. Although this obviously annoyed Mr. Preston, he continued explaining how Mr. Logan and another man deserted, and, after a poor attempt to hide in a wooden vaulting horse, the pair of them were caught at gunpoint on a train, whilst trying to speak rudimentary German. Mr. Logan guided us down a small side street as Mr. Preston complained that he needed the toilet. Mr. Silton asked why we were taking the scenic route while he was trying not to bleed to death. But Mr. Logan gave Mr. Silton a quick glance. You're fine, he said with the faintest of smiles. Soon the night sky was full of twinkling stars, and I was able to impress everyone with my navigation skills. The software was state-of-the-art, but I remember Heather telling me how the ancients had used the stars in much the same way. It always made me smile, thinking about the names she gave the constellations. It was the middle of the night by the time we got back, but Mrs. Silton was still up waiting for us. Really, again, in the same place, was all she said as she shook her head and tended to Mr. Silton's second bullet wound. Mr. Preston nearly knocked us over as he sprinted towards the bathroom. It appeared that his body had kept on making urine, even though it didn't have anywhere left to store it. I asked Mr. Silton about Heather and the old lady, but he said he was just about to wash his hair. When I asked him again later, he said the main thing was that we'd got Logan and the van back, and couldn't the rest wait until I had cleaned up the band room for him. I didn't know what to say. Everything we had done, everything I had helped him with, I thought it was all to get everyone back together. But now I didn't know what to think. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Silton explained that it was okay if I only travelled on trains and was alone. I must have looked worried as Mrs. Silton smiled and continued, "If you really want these idiots to go with you, they can disguise themselves and catch the next train after you." Mr. Silton was dismissive, and said I'd get nowhere without proper ID. "They'll be stopping robots for even the tiniest of things," he said. "And a robot passport costs a fortune these days." "Well," said Mrs. Silton, "it's a good job I've got this." Mr. Silton looked confused and asked where Mrs. Silton got the money. "Sometimes," said Mrs. Silton, "when God slams a door in your face and shoots you twice in the shoulder, he opens a window." Mrs. Silton explained how Preston had given her the extra money. He said there was good money to be made selling pills and powder to people that distracted them from the world being an absolute mess.
"Bedtime,"
said Mr. Logan as he carried his guitar into his room. Everyone else left one by one, leaving me stroking the dog. I awoke to the sound of Mrs. Silton making herself some breakfast. It felt very early, but I suppose it was just that we had gotten so late. Mrs. Silton gulped down her coffee, and with a reassuring smile she said, "Let's do this." The pedestrian tunnel was far longer than I expected, but it was nice. It gave me a chance to chat with Mrs. Silton. She told me she was from an upper-class family, and that her parents had nearly disowned her when she married Mr. Silton. But she said she really was happy being with her husband. And after all, as she put it, he did provide for her in this messed up world. However, I couldn't help but laugh when she said how much she liked Mr. Silton's band. I steered the conversation onto the topic of the war. She explained she had been a nurse near some major combat, but she looked really sad, so I changed the subject. I asked her if the town was nice. Mrs. Silton smiled, and described it as a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Train tickets cost $1,000, so Mrs. Silton said I should trade in some of the things I'd cleaned so I could afford to travel. However, when we tried the door, it was apparent that the junkyard owner wouldn't be back for a while. So Mrs. Siltron suggested I try to earn some money by other means. She said there were plenty of jobs in the town that a robot could do. The largest of the old ladies explained the job to me. I would be drying plates. She explained that old people couldn't afford to retire anymore, so she and her friends had to take menial jobs. All of the old ladies would be throwing plates at me as quickly as they could. I just had to catch and dry them. rickety old door led into some kind of drinking establishment. But the bartender soon made it clear that, as he put it, they didn't serve my kind here, and that I would have to wait outside. Suddenly, as if by magic, the shopkeeper appeared. "Hello, sir," he said. "If there's something that catches your eye, just pick it up and bring it over to me." The foreman explained the job to me. I would be making bricks. The world needed rebuilding and these bricks would more than help. He said I would be on the end of the production line and would be shaping the final parts of the bricks. All I had to do was hit the brick in time with everyone else.
Behind the doors. The train is now departing.
The post lady explained the job to me. I would be sorting parcels. Many people were now separated by desolate battlefields and needed these care packages to survive. The parcels were either red or blue. I just had to stamp the right ones, with the right color, at the right time.
I needed to use the passport machine to open the huge door.
I decided to leave the town and look around. Mrs. Silton smiled. "Be careful if you're going back out there," she said. "We'll still be here when you get back. Oh, and be sure you've still got enough money to catch the train." I made my way back out to the mainland. I made my way into the town.
Mind the doors. Mind the doors. The train is now departing.
Mr. Deck's TV studio was deep inside the bombed-out buildings of Big City.
Big City, this is Big City.
Once I'd made my way out of the station, Mr. Silton and the others jogged up alongside me. As soon as they got the chance, they ducked into an alleyway to change their clothes. Mr. Silton was the first to change. "Deck's studio's down that way," he said, "in that huge posh building, the British Corporation of Truth. The Corporation of Lies and Propaganda. A wretched hive of scum and villainy," said Mr. Preston. "And dancing competitions," said Mr. Silton. "There are some benches at the other end of the road. We'll wait there till the crew leave, then sneak in through one of the loading bays." While we walked, I asked how Mr. Deck had ended up back on television. Celebrities weren't very keen on walking down the red carpet at awards ceremonies with bombs falling from the skies, explained Mr. Silton. But they still craved attention and validation, so the solution was to host one big awards show in a giant underground bunker at Burlington. You can't broadcast from deep underground, so they had to run cables to the transmitter through a vent on the surface. A bomb-sized vent, as it turned out. It took a great shot. 1 in a million. The lack of survivors meant Z-listers like Deck were now the A-list by default. Just then, Mr. Logan interrupted, saying it was time to move. Robots are allowed pretty much anywhere in the building as long as they look the part, whispered Mr. Silton. You just need to be wearing no clothes, and have the blankest of faces. I didn't really like the sound of that, but I realized it was the only way I'd be able to get in. So I took off my suit and made my face blank. Blanker, said Mr. Silton. Blanker with an ER, said Mr. Silton again. Well, I suppose that'll have to do. Deck's dressing room is in some lavish suite, said Mr. Silton as Mr. Preston and Mr. Logan lowered me into the empty corridor below. Have a look around, whispered Mr. Silton, and we'll catch up with you in a bit.
As I approached the group of people, a man in a white lab coat was demonstrating what he called the future of robotics. He said that anyone interested would be able to see it in action on one of the sound stages later today. "It's much better than these old models," he said as he stared at me. "My new version does exactly what you tell it to."
Now, this was clearly worth something. Some things were worthless junk, but this could be sold for a decent price. No wonder people wanted to be on television so much. TV studios were full of video games. As soon as I entered Mr. Deck's dressing room, he shouted, "Get out!" I said I don't want to be disturbed. I was so shocked that I couldn't keep my blank face. Mr. Deck looked confused. "It's you, isn't it? Get away from me, you yellow bastard," he said as he reached for a huge red alarm button, but he was interrupted by Mr. Silton falling from a vent in the ceiling. "All right, Deck," smirked Mr. Silton. "Hello, Barry. And it's Mr. Deck if you don't mind," replied Mr. Deck as he hammered on the alarm button. Quick, said Mr. Silton as he turned to me, find a way to stop that alarm.
There were 4 alarms left to turn off. There were 3 alarms left. There were 2 alarms left. There was 1 alarm left. had completely turned off the alarm.
A serious-looking security guard walked into the garden set, so I quickly approached him. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I had to keep him out of Mr. Deck's dressing room. I attempted to resume the blank face that Mr. Silton had shown me as I announced that Mr. Deck was not to be disturbed. For some reason I said it in an unusually high-pitched voice, which didn't seem helpful. The security guard's eyes narrowed. Now in a full panic, for some reason I decided this was a good moment to do the finger guns for the first time. The large man shoved me out of the way. But quick as a flash Mr. Logan had appeared and snapped his neck. "Sorry, had to be done," was all he said before running back toward Mr. Deck's room.
"I didn't know you shredded the axe," said Mr. Logan as he placed an acoustic guitar into an ornate sarcophagus.
"I don't," said Mr. Deck. "I got it for Elton John to sign." For once, everyone else looked as confused as I did. "We'll take this wine, and this portable TV," said Mr. Preston as he packed the coffin with as many expensive things he could find. "These bathrobes are pretty fancy as well." "Put those down," said Mr. Deck. "Elton John gave me those." "What's with you and Elton bloody John?" asked Mr. Silton, but Mr. Deck just looked angry. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "There's easier ways to get good wine and cheese. You can't just burst in here and take my stuff." A large smile crept across Mr. Silton's face as he said, "Oh, it's not just your stuff we're taking." "You try to take me anywhere," said Mr. Deck, "and I'll scream this place down. I know people in high places. I'll have you executed, and that little yellow bastard dismantled. My father is the head of the BCT." But Mr. Silton's smile widened as he pulled out a bag full of familiar-looking mushrooms. "Robot, take the sarcophagus this way back to the loading bay," said Mr. Silton. "We'll climb back through the vents and meet you there." Mr. Silton was worried that the studio set was quiet. In fact, he worried that it was, as he put it, too quiet. So, as per usual, it was me that went first. Once away from the studio, we were able to duck down a few dark alleyways. "I think we're safe," said Mr. Silton. "You get dressed and head back to the train now. We'll wait here and travel back later with our cargo."